Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting material you sent in, all focusing on student well-being in higher education. Seems like it's definitely on people's minds.
It really does. And today, our aim is to sort of sift through it all.
Yeah, pull out the key stuff. What really impacts student burnout
Yeah.
and engagement?
Exactly. We want to figure out why some students seem to sail through university full of energy, while others just feel completely overwhelmed.
And there's a specific idea, a theory, that comes up a lot in these sources.
Yes, the study demands resources theory, or SDR for short. It's quite powerful.
Okay, SDR theory. So at a high level, what's that about? Is it the pressures versus the support they get?
That's pretty much it. It looks at the demands placed on students.
Hmm.
You know, the workload, the deadlines, the difficult concepts.
Tough stuff.
Right. And then it looks at the resources they have available to meet those demands. Things like good teaching, support from peers, maybe even decent study spaces.
So it suggests well-being, like whether you burn out or feel engaged, depends on that mix.
Precisely. It hinges on that interplay between demands and resources.
So it's not just like innate toughness or something.
No, not entirely. The theory really emphasizes the environment, the context of studying,
Okay.
and it helps explain why students might react differently to similar situations. But crucially, it also suggests students aren't just passive victims.
Ah, so they can influence their own well-being.
Yes, that's a really key part of it. Understanding the demands and resources can empower students to take action.
That sounds much more hopeful. So when we talk about well-being here, what are the main states we're focusing on?
Well, the sources consistently highlight two main aspects: student burnout and student engagement, almost like two ends of a spectrum.
Okay, let's start with burnout then. What does that actually feel like for a student?
The research describes it as this combination of things. First, there's just overwhelming exhaustion, feeling totally drained by your studies.
Just physically and mentally wiped out.
Yeah. And then there's this cynical attitude, a sort of detachment, like your studies don't matter or you just don't care anymore.
Losing that connection.
Exactly. And the third part is feeling incompetent, like you're just not cut out for it, you're not a good student. It really hits your self-perception.
Wow, that sounds incredibly difficult. And the sources link this to some serious consequences.
They really do. It's not just feeling bad. There's research linking burnout to depressive symptoms.
Okay.
Increased substance use has also been found in some studies. And quite alarmingly, links to suicidal ideation have been reported too.
That's incredibly serious. It really underscores why this matters so much.
Absolutely. And it impacts their academic life directly too. Things like absenteeism, just not showing up to class.
Right, which makes sense if you feel exhausted and cynical.
And a higher risk of dropping out altogether. Plus, there's clear evidence showing burnout predicts lower grades, impaired academic achievement.
So it's a downward spiral that affects everything, their health, their studies, their future. Okay, let's flip to the positive side. Engagement. What does that look like?
Engagement is described as this really positive, fulfilling state. It's study-related, so it's about how you feel about your learning.
So the opposite of burnout, energized.
Yes, exactly. The key components are vigor, having that mental energy and enthusiasm for your studies.
Like really wanting to get stuck in.
Right. Then there's dedication, feeling committed, seeing the significance in what you're doing, feeling proud.
A sense of purpose.
And finally, absorption. That state where you're completely engrossed, focused, time just flies by because you're so into what you're learning.
Almost like being in the zone.
That's a great way to put it. Engaged students often show more mental resilience. They persevere when things get tough.
They don't give up easily.
No, they have that commitment, that enthusiasm, that focus.
And presumably, engagement leads to better outcomes, just like burnout leads to negative ones.
Yeah, absolutely. The research is quite clear here. Engaged students tend to be more active learners. They often get better grades.
Makes sense.
They're less likely to consider dropping out, more likely to persist in their education. And interestingly, it seems to boost their future prospects too.
How so?
Well, studies link engagement to better job possibilities after graduation and even a higher likelihood of pursuing, say, entrepreneurial careers.
So engagement pays off, both during university and afterwards. Okay, now we understand burnout and engagement better. Let's go back to the SDR theory, demands and resources. Let's break those down.
Right. So the core idea is that we can categorize aspects of the study environment into these two buckets: things that demand effort and things that provide support or motivation.
Okay, study demands first. What kind of things fall into that?
Demands are basically anything about studying that costs energy, physical, mental, or emotional effort.
So the obvious ones are workload, pace.
Definitely. A high volume of work, a fast-paced, complex topics that require a lot of cognitive effort. Time pressure is a big one, too.
Constant deadlines.
Yes, and sometimes conflicting deadlines, which adds another layer of stress. Learning obstacles, maybe unclear instructions or difficult concepts.
That all sounds very familiar.
It probably does. But it's not just the academic side. Demands can also include things like financial problems, poor housing conditions, or even just the difficulty of adjusting to university life, especially for first-year students.
Right, the whole context of being a student.
Even things like negative group dynamics and collaborative projects, social loafing, conflicts that can be a demand.
Okay, so a wide range of stressors. Now, what about the other side, the resources? What helps students cope?
Study resources are the aspects that have motivational potential. They can help buffer those demands we just talked about, and they also facilitate learning and personal growth.
So what are some examples?
We can think about them in a few categories. There are study-specific resources, like having competent, helpful lecturers,
For sure.
access to good learning materials, maybe study facilitators or mentors. Then there are broader university resources.
Like the facilities.
Yeah, good classrooms, reliable computers, library access, but also things like a positive campus climate, a sense of belonging.
That feeling of community seems really important.
It really is. Other examples from the research include things like specific learning support services.
Like writing centers or tutoring.
Exactly. Having autonomy, some control over how and when you study. Support from family and friends is a key resource, too, even if it's external to the university itself.
Sure, your personal support network.
Opportunities for development, like workshops or interesting projects, and just general clarity about what's expected of you, role clarity.
It feels like having a good mix of these can make a huge difference when you're facing those demands.
Absolutely. And it's also important to note something the research highlights,
Which is.
that access to these resources isn't always equal. Socioeconomic status can play a big role.
Ah, right. Students from less privileged backgrounds might have fewer financial resources, maybe less family support, or fewer opportunities.
Exactly. They might face more barriers in accessing tutoring, materials, even just having a quiet place to study. It creates an uneven playing field when it comes to managing demands.
That's a really critical point. So we have demands draining energy and resources providing support and motivation. How does the theory say these actually lead to burnout or engagement?
It proposes two main pathways or processes. The first is called the health impairment process.
Okay.
This is basically where high study demands over time deplete a student's energy, like constantly running on empty.
Leads to strain.
Yes, chronic strain, exhaustion, and eventually that leads down the path towards burnout. Lots of studies support this link.
So demand strain burnout. Makes sense. What's the other pathway?
That's the motivational process. This focuses on the resources.
That's good stuff.
Right. Having sufficient study resources tends to foster engagement. It fuels motivation, makes students feel capable, helps them achieve their goals.
For resources, motivation, engagement.
Essentially, yes. When students feel supported, have the tools they need, feel like they belong, they're much more likely to feel energized, dedicated, absorbed in their studies.
Okay, those two processes seem clear. But don't demands and resources also interact somehow? I think you mentioned a buffer and a boost.
Yes, exactly. It's not always just two separate tracks. The buffer hypothesis is the idea that resources can weaken the negative impact of demands.
How does that work?
Well, imagine you have a really heavy workload, a high demand, but you also have strong social support from friends or great feedback from a tutor. Those are resources.
Yeah.
Those resources can act like a cushion, making the high demand feel less stressful, less likely to lead straight to burnout. Control over your time is another resource that can buffer pressure.
So resources protect you when demands are high. That's really useful. What about the boost idea?
The boost hypothesis is interesting. It suggests that demands, particularly challenging demands, can actually amplify the positive effect of resources on engagement.
Wait, demands boosting engagement.
Think of it like this. If you're tackling a really difficult but stimulating project, a challenging demand, and you have excellent resources like great supervision and peer collaboration,
Right.
successfully meeting that challenge because you had those resources can feel incredibly rewarding and boost your engagement even more than if the task was easy. The resource makes the challenge feel achievable and motivating.
Ah, I see. So challenge isn't always bad. If you have the right support to meet it, it can actually make the success feel sweeter, more engaging.
Exactly. It suggests an optimal learning environment might have challenges, but also strong support.
Now, the sources also talk a lot about the student themselves, their personal resources. What falls under that?
Personal resources are more about the individual's internal beliefs and capabilities. Think of things like self-efficacy, that core belief that you can succeed in your studies.
Confidence in your abilities.
Yes. Also, optimism, hope, resilience. Sometimes these are grouped together as psychological capital. It's about your outlook and your perceived ability to control your environment and bounce back from setbacks.
So, internal strengths, how do they fit into the SDR model?
They're really important. Research shows students with stronger personal resources tend to have higher well-being, better engagement, and achieve more academically.
They seem to fare better overall.
Yes. And there's also this interesting idea of a reciprocal relationship.
Meaning?
Well, personal resources can help you gain more steady resources. If you're confident and optimistic, you might be more likely to seek out help from a lecturer or join a study group, for example.
So your internal state helps you leverage the external support.
Exactly. And conversely, having good external study resources might help build your confidence and optimism over time. It can be a positive cycle.
Like success breeding success. Do personal resources also help directly with demands?
Yes, they can act as a buffer too, much like study resources. That resilience, that self-belief can help students cope better when facing high study demands, reducing the negative impact on their well-being.
So it's a combination of the external environment, the demands and study resources, and the internal environment, the personal resources, that shapes the student experience.
That's a really good summary of it.
This leads nicely into what students can actually do. The sources mention proactive and reactive behaviors. Let's start with proactive to gain spirals.
Right. Proactive behaviors are when students actively try to shape their studies for the better. A key concept here is study crafting.
Study crafting. What's that?
It's about proactively changing aspects of your studies to make them more meaningful, more engaging, a better fit for you. It's like customizing your learning experience.
Okay, so what does that look like practically?
It could be things like actively seeking out challenging tasks that interest you, even if they're extra work.
Taking initiative.
Yes. Or consciously trying to increase your resources, like building a stronger network with peers or mentors, asking for specific feedback to improve.
Being strategic about support.
It can also involve cognitively reframing tasks, thinking about the purpose or positive aspects of an assignment you don't enjoy. Or even trying to make mundane tasks more fun or game-like, sometimes called playful study design.
Making learning a bit more like a game. Interesting.
Yeah, redesigning how you approach a task to make it more intrinsically motivating.
And how does this relate back to engagement?
Well, engagement often fuels study crafting. When you feel engaged, you have the energy and motivation to be proactive, to shape your studies.
Right.
And study crafting, in turn, often leads to more resources, more meaningful work, which then boosts engagement further. It creates this positive upward spiral.
A gain spiral makes sense. Engaged students act in ways that make them even more engaged. Now, the flip side. Reactive, self-undermining behaviors. The loss spirals.
Yes, self-undermining behaviors are sort of the undesirable responses to stress. They're things students do, often unintentionally, that actually create more problems or obstacles for themselves.
It's like shooting yourself in the foot when you're already struggling.
Kind of, yeah. Examples might include starting conflicts with group members when feeling stressed, finding it impossible to concentrate, or letting work pile up into a huge backlog.
Procrastination must be a big one here.
Definitely. Procrastination is a classic example. Putting things off might feel better in the short term, but it usually increases stress later and can hurt performance.
So these are coping mechanisms that backfire.
Pretty much. They stem from feeling strained or exhausted, but they end up making the situation worse.
And how does this create a loss spiral?
Well, the strain from high demands can trigger these self-undermining behaviors. But these behaviors like avoiding work or making errors due to poor concentration often increase the demands even further.
Like now you have even more work to catch up on.
Exactly, which increases the strain, which can lead to more self-undermining. It becomes a negative downward cycle. Stress leads to actions that create more stress.
It really highlights the importance of recognizing those patterns. Okay, so finally, how does all of this demands, resources, burnout, engagement, student behaviors impact the big picture outcomes for students and for universities?
The SDR model suggests these factors influence outcomes both directly and indirectly.
Okay, direct effects first.
Directly, some demands, particularly hindering ones like constant ambiguity or obstacles, can negatively impact things like GPA. Although, as we discussed, challenging demands might sometimes be beneficial if resources are there.
Right.
And directly, having good support resources generally leads to higher student satisfaction and better achievement.
That seems intuitive. And the indirect effects through burnout and engagement.
Yes, burnout and engagement act as crucial mediators. They explain how demands and resources affect many key outcomes.
Such as?
Well, things like academic performance, overall life satisfaction, intentions to drop out or persist, psychological well-being, even the likelihood of pursuing postgraduate studies.
So high demands and low resources might lead to burnout, which then leads to poorer grades or wanting to leave.
Exactly. Or high resources might foster engagement, which then leads to better performance and a desire to continue studying. Burnout tends to lead to withdrawal, disengagement, maybe those self-undermining behaviors.
Pulling back.
Yes. While engagement leads to investment, active learning, proactive behaviors, so the student's well-being state really influences how they function, which impacts them personally, but also the institution through things like retention rates and overall success.
So fostering engagement and preventing burnout isn't just nice to have for universities. It's pretty fundamental to their mission and success.
You could definitely argue that.
This has been, well, really clarifying. Trying to wrap our heads around the SDR theory. If you had to
Yeah.
boil it down, what's the main takeaway message?
I think the core message is that this theory gives us a really useful lens, a way to look at student well-being not just as an individual issue, but as something deeply connected to the balance or imbalance between the pressures students face and the support systems available to them.
It brings the environment into focus.
It does, but it also avoids being deterministic. It shows that well-being isn't just something that happens to students.
Right, because students themselves can play an active role. That
Yeah.
seems really important.
Absolutely. Through those proactive behaviors we talked about, study crafting, seeking resources, managing how they react to stress, students can genuinely influence their own experience, their own engagement levels, and navigate those demands more effectively. And understanding the role of personal resources, that internal resilience is part of that too.
It puts some power back in the hands of the student, which feels constructive. This has given me, and hopefully our listeners, a lot to think about. So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with.
Yeah, perhaps just this. Think about your own situation, whether it's studying, work, or any area where you face demands. What are the main pressures, the key demands you experience? And importantly, what resources, external support, internal strengths do you have access to?
Sort of doing your own mini SDR audit.
Kind of, just reflecting on that balance. How could understanding this framework, this interplay of demands and resources, maybe empower you? Could you actively seek out more resources? Could you try crafting your situation to be a better fit? Or maybe just become more aware of those potential self-undermining traps?
Food for thought, definitely. It's about recognizing the dynamics and seeing where you might have some leverage. We really encourage you to mull over these ideas, study crafting, personal resources, managing demands. See if they resonate with your own journey. Thanks for diving deep with us today.